The boy was 9 years old when they placed the crown upon his head. He did not ask for it. He did not understand it. He only knew that his father was dead, that the great hall smelled of incense and rot, that the bishops spoke in Latin and the lords knelt before him with eyes that held no warmth, only hunger. The crown was heavy, not because of the gold, not because of the jewels encrusted along its rim. It was heavy because of what it carried, the weight of a kingdom, to the expectations of violent men, the ghosts of every king who wore it before him. And the boy, this child king, had no idea that the crown he now wore was a death sentence wrapped in silk and ceremony. This was medieval kingship. This was the truth behind the throne. In the grand tapestries, kings sit proud. They hold scepters. They command armies. They feast in golden halls while minstrels sing of their glory. But the tapestries lie. The medieval king lived in a cage of his own crown. His power was not absolute. His throne was not secure. Every day was a negotiation. Every night was a gamble. He was surrounded by men who smiled and schemed in equal measure, lords who pledged loyalty with one hand while sharpening daggers with the other. The crown did not make a man powerful. It made him a target. From the moment of coronation, the clock began ticking. Enemies circled like wolves scenting blood. Brothers plotted. Uncles whispered. The foreign kings watched and waited for any sign of weakness. The medieval king could trust no one. Not his council, not his wife. Sometimes not even his own sons. History remembers the conquerors, the warriors, the kings who built empires and crushed rebellions beneath iron hooves. But history forgets the others, the kings who were murdered in their beds, the kings who were starved in dungeons, the kings who were blinded, castrated, poisoned, and erased from memory. For every Edward who conquered, there was an Edward who was deposed. For every Henry who triumphed, there was a Henry who lost everything. The throne was soaked in blood long before any king sat upon it. Consider what it meant to be crowned. The ceremony itself was designed to terrify. The king knelt before God and the church. He was anointed with holy oil, a sacred ritual that bound his soul to the realm. The bishop spoke of divine right. They told him he was chosen by heaven itself. But divine right meant divine responsibility. If the crops failed, it was the king's fault. If plague swept the land, the king had displeased God. If enemies invaded, the king was weak. The people looked upward, the church looked downward, and the king stood in between, crushed by the weight of impossible expectations. He was supposed to be warrior and saint, judge and father, merciful yet ruthless, generous yet wealthy. He was supposed to win wars without taxing the lords too heavily, and he was supposed to keep peace without appearing soft. He was supposed to produce heirs, strong sons, or watch his dynasty crumble into civil war. One wrong decision, one moment of hesitation, one battle lost, and the crown would find another's head. The loneliness of kingship was absolute. A medieval king could never show weakness, not to his lords, not to his enemies, not even to himself. Tears were treason. Doubt was death. He had to project strength every moment of every day, even when his kingdom burned and his treasury emptied and his allies abandoned him one by one. There were no true friends. Friendship required equality, and a king had no equals. Every man who laughed with him wanted something. Every woman who warmed his bed had been placed there by scheming families. Every counselor who offered advice was playing a longer game. The king ate alone, even when surrounded by hundreds. He slept alone, even in a crowded castle. His thoughts remained locked inside his skull, because to share them was to arm his enemies. Some kings went mad from it, truly mad. They saw conspiracies in shadows. They executed loyal servants on mere suspicion. They trusted no one, and in doing so, ensured that no one remained trustworthy. Paranoia became self-fulfilling prophecy. Others simply broke. They retreated into religion, spending their days in prayer while their kingdoms fell apart. They abandoned their duties, out chasing hunts and pleasures while lords carved the realm into personal fiefdoms, and some, the coldest, the hardest, became the monsters that history remembers. They learned that fear was safer than love, that a corpse could not betray, that a throne built on terror might stand longer than one built on trust. The body of a king was not his own. Every meal was tasted for poison before it touched his lips. Every chamber was searched. Every new servant was watched. But precautions only delayed the inevitable. The poison found its way eventually. The blade found its mark. The conspiracy ripened in darkness and struck when the king least expected. Medieval kings died violently at staggering rates. William Rufus took an arrow in a hunting accident that was almost certainly murder. Edward II was allegedly killed with a red-hot poker, a death designed to humiliate even as it destroyed. That Richard II was starved to death in Pontefract Castle after being deposed by his own cousin. The list stretches on, king after king meeting ends that peasants would have considered nightmares. And when death came, it was often delivered by those closest to the crown. Sons killed fathers for the throne. Brothers killed brothers. Nobles who had knelt in loyalty rose up with swords drawn. The very men sworn to protect the king became his executioners when the political winds shifted. Trust no one. Trust nothing. Trust least of all the men who call you their sovereign. But perhaps the cruelest weight was legacy. The medieval king knew that history would judge him, that chroniclers were already writing his story, that future generations would either praise his name or curse it. And he knew, in the dark hours before dawn, that he had little control over which it would be. A king could spend decades building a kingdom, strengthening borders, filling treasuries, establishing laws, and then one foolish heir, one lost battle, one twist of fate could undo everything. His name would be attached to failure. His dynasty would collapse. Everything he sacrificed would mean nothing. This was the burden that kept kings awake at night. Not the assassins, not the rebels, not the scheming lords, but the knowledge that it could all be for nothing, that the crown he bled for might become a footnote, that his children might squander his legacy or die before they could continue it. The medieval king carried the past and the future simultaneously. He was the link in a chain stretching backward to ancestors he never knew and forward to descendants he would never meet. If he broke that chain, if he failed, then everything ended. The weight of that responsibility crushed souls. So why did they want it? Why did men kill for the crown? Why did they scheme and betray and sacrifice everything for a throne that promised only suffering? Because the alternative was worse. To be a lord beneath a king was to be a servant, to kneel, to obey, to watch others make decisions that shaped your fate. Medieval men were raised on glory. They were taught that power was the only virtue that mattered, that a man who did not rise would be trampled by those who did. And so they reached for the crown, knowing it would destroy them. Or as they climbed over corpses to sit upon a throne of swords, they convinced themselves that they would be different, that they would be the king who succeeded, that history would remember them as great. Most were wrong. Most were forgotten, or remembered only for how they fell. Their names became cautionary tales, whispered in cold halls. Their bones were scattered in unmarked graves. But still, they reached. Still, they wanted. Because the crown was a lie that men desperately needed to believe. The boy who was crowned at 9 did not survive to see 30. His lords abandoned him. His kingdom fractured. The men who knelt before him in that incense-heavy hall eventually rose against him. They took his crown. They took his throne. They took his life and gave it to another who would fare no better. The crown passed to new heads. It always did. And each new king learned the same terrible truth that the boy had learned too late. The weight of a crown was not gold. It was grief. It was loneliness. It was the slow, grinding destruction of everything a man once was. It was the heaviest thing in the world, and it crushed them all in the end.